Do you want to sound more natural and fluent in English? So today we're going to deep dive into the passive voice. If you've ever wondered how to talk about things without focusing on who did them, this video is for you. In English, we use the passive voice when the action or the receiver of the action is more important than the person performing the action. So the passive voice is used a lot in news, in instructions, science and formal writing. So it's very useful when you're, especially at an intermediate level, and you want to get more fluent and more confident in your writing and also in your speaking when you're using more technical English. In this video, we're going to break down the passive voice. I'm going to show you when and how to use it and give you plenty of examples to make it easy to understand. So what is the passive? So in a passive sentence, the subject receives the action rather than performing it. The structure is simple. You have the subject plus the form of be plus the past participle of the verb. So an example could be the book was read by John. John is the doer, but the focus is on the book, not on John. So the subject plus the form of be plus the past participle. So to understand the passive, we need to look at the active phrase and a passive phrase for comparison. So in an active phrase, this sentence would be John read the book. This emphasizes who did the action, but in the passive voice, we say the book was read by John. The focus is now on the book and not on John. So John read the book was read by John. The first use of the passive is when the person doing the action is unknown or not important. They're irrelevant. We don't need to know who they are. So we use the passive voice when we don't know who did the action or it's not very important to what we're talking about. An example would be in news reporting, building was destroyed by fire. The building was destroyed by fire. So we don't know who caused it. And in this news article, it's not important. It's not necessary to say. Another example could be the letter was sent yesterday. It doesn't matter who sent it. We don't know who sent it. Can you give me an example with this use when you don't know who the doer is or who the person doing the action is, or they're just not important for the action? Can you give me an example? Put it in the comments. The second use is when the focus is more on the action or the result and it's not on the doer. So we might know who the person doing the action is, but it's not as important as the result or the action itself. For example, in scientific writing, the experiment was conducted in the lab. The experiment was conducted in the lab. We want you to know that the experiment was done in a lab. That's the most important thing, not who did it. Another example could be the cake was baked by my mum. It's more important to know about the cake. The cake is the subject. We're more interested in the cake, not who baked it, even though we know it was baked by my mum, but that's not important. The cake was baked by my mum. So use 3 of the passive is in formal or impersonal context. So this is when we use it in instructions or in formal reports. So if you buy your product and you have to build it yourself, the instruction manual will be written in the passive. So the documents must be signed by the manager before submission. The documents is the subject. We're more interested in the documents being signed, not who signs them. The documents must be signed by the manager before submission. Another example could be all complaints should be addressed within 24 hours. So it's not who is going to address them, but the complaints is the important point here. We want the complaints as the subject because we want them to be addressed rather than who's actually doing it, because it could be multiple people, one person, we don't know. Can you think of an example where you use the passive voice in this context? Can you write it in the comments below and I'll give you feedback. How to form the passive. Let's look at the basic structure. So it's all about using the right form of the verb to be, am, is, are, was, were, etc. and the past participle of the main verb. Let's look at the tense changes in the passive voice. So the passive voice changes depending on tense of the active verb. Let's look at different tenses. Present simple, the active phrase is she writes the email. passive phrase is the email was written by her. You could even take out by her. The email was written. That's all we want to know. The important thing is that the email has been written, not who did it. Past simple, he cleaned the room. Active, passive, the room was cleaned by him. We could also take out by him in this case, the room was cleaned. That's all we want to know. That's the most important thing. Future simple example, an active phrase would be, they will finish the project, and a passive phrase will be, project will be finished by them. Looking at the present continuous, she was writing the report. In the active phrase, in the passive phrase, the report was being written by her. In the present perfect, they have completed the task. In the active phrase and in the passive phrase, the task has been completed by them. In the past perfect, in an active phrase, she had finished the work. In the passive phrase, the work had been finished by her. So let's practice. Can you change this active phrase into a passive phrase? I eat an apple every day. What would the passive look like? Can you write it in the comments for me? Let's look at examples of the passive in different contexts. So in practical use, where you see the passive a lot. So in the news, the passive is used a lot. It's often used when the doer of the action is unknown or unimportant. The bridge was repaired last week. We don't want to know who repaired the bridge. We just want to know that the bridge is the most important thing. It has been repaired, or it was repaired last week in this case. In instructions, the passive is used in instruction manuals to explain actions. For example, the device should be charged for 3 hours before use. In science and research, in scientific writing, the passive voice is more professional. So in science and experiments, it's more common to use the passive because the focus is more on the action or the result rather than the person actually doing it. We're not interested so much in who the researcher is, but we want to know what the research is, the answers to the research. So for example, the solution was heated to 50 degrees. We don't want to know he heated the solution to 50 degrees. The most important thing we need to know is the solution, subject. And also we use the passive in everyday situations. In everyday life, we use the passive voice when we care more about the result or the action rather than the person doing it, or we don't know them. In this case, I give you an example. My phone was stolen yesterday. I don't know who stole it, and it doesn't really matter who stole it. The point is that it was stolen. That's more important. I'm stressing that point. Common mistakes to avoid using the passive. So make sure you use the correct form of the verb to be. So the book was read by me is correct, but the book is read by me yesterday is not. We're talking about yesterday, so we need to use was, not is. Another mistake is forgetting to use the past participle of the verb. For example, the book is written by me is correct. Incorrect would be the book is right by me. So today we've learned about the passive voice in English, how to use it, when to use it, and I've given you examples. It's a very useful tool to make your English sound more natural and to also recognize that we do use it more than you think, and it is used in many different situations. So even that phrase I just said now, it is used. The passive is used. That's a passive phrase. It's used by lots of people. I don't need to say lots of people use it, but it is used by lots of people, and that is a passive phrase. So we speak it every day and we use it every day, and it will really take your English up to the next level. I hope you liked this video and it helped you understand the passive voice, which many people find a little bit tricky sometimes. If you found it useful, please subscribe and give me a thumbs up, and I'm looking forward to seeing your comments of your examples of the passive voice below, and I will give you feedback. One thing before you go, here's a challenge for you. Can you give me an example of a passive voice? They build houses in this area. I'm looking forward to seeing your comments, and I will give you feedback. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you in the next lesson.